So first of all, I have to thank Vancouver School District. And where's Lisa Padrini?
Stand up, Lisa.
Where's Lisa?
Stand up.
Stand up. Sorry. And it was really Lisa who was my partner in crime in this, because I went to her and I said, you know, I want to bring this program to schools. We want to do some research. We want to do research right away. Do you think that there'd be any teachers interested in trying out this new program that incorporates mindfulness with social and emotional learning? And do you think they would be willing to have research done on them? And so Lisa really helped do that and be able to identify. We invited teachers to an information session, said, can you be a part of the research? And that first year we did a study of 12 classrooms, 4th to 7th grade. 6 of them were something we call control classrooms, meaning they didn't get the Mind Up program. They were treatment as usual and did the regular social responsibility. And the other 6 classrooms were classrooms that received the Mind Up program. And that time it was called mindfulness education. And before the program began, we really had to identify how do we measure this. So we looked at things like, a goal of the Mind Up program is to promote well-being in children and happiness. So we looked at optimism. Another goal is to help them become more attentive and less aggressive and have more social emotional competence. So we had measures of those as well. And so before the program began, with the control kids and the kids in the intervention classes, we gave them a whole battery of measures to assess their well-being. And then the program happened, and then afterward, we went and assessed them again. And what we found, as Goldie said, was remarkable. In a relatively short time period, 10 weeks, really, for this first one, we found increased optimism. Children who received the Mind Up program became more optimistic about their lives.
How did you know that? What do you mean by measures?
We had a measure.
But what? Oh, a measure! Measuring stick. Is it you ask the children? Do you look at the children? Like, how do you figure out?
It's a good. Yeah, I just Marie and I have talked a lot, so I love her questions. So we had a measure that actually reported things like, most days I start off thinking I'll have a good day. And we looked at, and we used very well, I won't go into all the details, but very solid, psychometrically strong measures that allow you to assess these things. And one thing I want to say about optimism, how many of you have heard of optimism before? How many of you want to have optimism or are optimistic? And optimism, which in fact is that idea of looking at the glass half full, wearing rose-colored glasses. People who are optimistic are a bit delusional. But we find that optimism is associated with a number of very positive outcomes in terms of better recovery from health problems, longevity, better interpersonal relationships. So it's really a critical aspect to improve. And so we were able to measure the optimism, and then the children's, we also then looked at their behaviors and teacher ratings and found that teachers found them more attentive, less aggressive, and have better social and emotional competence. But one thing I want to say that we always have done in the research, which sometimes is missed out, and I think though Cliff mentioned last night that he actually looks at their experiences of the program. So we went and asked the teachers, what were your experiences with this Mind Up program? And we've done that every year since. But we also went and asked the children, what do you think of this program? So first of all, the teachers loved it, and second of all, the children loved it. 90% of them said, I really like this program. And what was fascinating, one question that we just kind of came up with was, have you gone and taught any of these daily practices to anyone in your family or outside of the school system? And we found over 50% of children went and were teaching other people how to use mindfulness in their lives. Their parents, a lot, their siblings, and such.
Goldie, you mentioned gratitude. And why did you build that in? Did you think that was a good idea to build?
Gratitude is important because also scientifically, it has literally taken people out of depressed states. And they did a lot of great research on that, and there's been research over the years on gratitude. But it's astounding how you can pull yourself out of a depressed state. These people were in bed. They were really depressed. And in this one particular study, I think it was like 85% or 6 or whatever percent literally got out of bed and started having a relatively functional day. So I thought, why don't kids start to practice gratitude? It changes the brain. It changes how you are. And by the way, when brains are building and growing, you want to be able to give them as much positive input as possible because these are tools they'll use forever.
Goldie mentioned the different components of the program. The kids learn about their brain, they take brain breaks, they become mindful in all their senses, they do gratitude. Were you able, Kim, to figure out which of those components were the active ingredients, or how did you pull that apart?
No. So essentially, it's very interesting because when the program was being developed, the idea was to take from 4 different areas, the best, sort of the latest scientific research on mindfulness, on neuroscience, on social and emotional learning, and positive psychology, and put them into the mix. They were all aligned anyway. So you don't know if it's, well, like
I'm going to
you could say,
remind you of something. We did 2 studies. The first one was a nascent early study. Remember that study? And it was before we developed, the big program. But we did have a little brain in there, not a lot. We did have certain things in there. And that was the very first one. And you told me that actually some teachers did not implement everything, but they did do the brain breaks and the mindfulness practice. And the research showed very similar outcomes. So that's a secret sauce, I would say, is getting kids to focus 3 times a day or whatever during the day to understand and get calm and focused, because it does emit neurotransmitters that are very positive. It ups your serotonin. It brings in, dopamine, and it really helps. So that I thought was interesting. So I think a lot of the secret sauce of the program is that.
Yeah, and I agree. It's interesting. In that first study, we did had teachers keep a diary of the daily practices and the lessons, and we found that what was fascinating, again, 3 times a day to do these daily practices across 10 weeks every day, that teachers, the implementation rate was 88% of the time they were doing them, the average of 88% for me, which was really high.
Is it high?
Whereas the 88%, typically a program like this that's implemented in schools, if it's implemented with 60% fidelity, that's considered really high. So the idea that, 88% means that this is really, really key. And the other thing I just have to mention, and it really is Goldie's brilliance, I have to just tell you, it was just one of the barriers to a lot of these programs, social and emotional learning programs coming into school, is teachers feel it's one more thing to do. How am I going to add it to my regular curriculum? How am I going to put it into math? Like, really, I have so many pulls in other directions. How can I now do this as well? But what Mind Up really did, and Goldie, being the architect of that, was number one, right from the start, Goldie involved teachers in giving feedback. So every study, we actually had 4 different revisions, and every time teachers gave the feedback, and the kids as well. What worked, what didn't work, what was the best thing. And it was really the teachers, the program got to be where it is today because of that input. And secondly, to put the neuroscience component in there. Because I think teachers, again, feel when they're doing something that seems so far removed from the curriculum, they feel like, I have to really do math. But if I'm going to teach you about your brain, then I feel like I'm really doing the curriculum as well.
Well, also, when you do mindful tasting, for instance, you can do adjectives. So what you do is you just do your mindful tasting. They slow down their chewing. They do the thing. They love it. They do, you bring in something in the class. But that week, you're going to really, work on adjectives or adverbs or whatever. So you bring in part of what you're tasting. What does it taste like? Bitter? Does it taste this? You write on the board. So you bring in, that sort of thing, and, you do that. But you were just talking about, one of the incarnations of the program is that our original program was 250 pages. And I got a forklift, and then I brought it home. Ding dong, here it comes. And I read through it, and we came here, remember we came here? And I said, and Molly worked with us and basically helped, collapse it. Because I said, teachers need to hold this in their hand. We can't have volumes of books that are on this. So let's simplify this for our teachers so it's easy to do. And it's fun. So Molly worked with us and created it and sort of collapsed all the very important information into a much easier, more approachable program.
Oh, some good questions here.
I do want to ask one question, actually. How many of you have been trained in the Mind Up program? Wow. I wanted to mention, so in Vancouver, the first training in 2005 was 17 teachers. Actually, it was right at UBC. It was right down at the education building. In 2006, there were 48 teachers trained. In 2007, this is in BC, in Vancouver. In 2007, there were 140. And as of this school year, there were 54 Mind Up trainings, totaling the number of teachers trained in British Columbia, 3,600.
You're great. All right, so there's some great questions coming from people. I see some kind of themes emerging here. Just a simple one. First of all, Kim, that people are asking, have you published your research findings, and if so, where can they find it?
Yes, they have. We have a couple of studies published, and I guess, aren't we going to put things up on the Dalai Lama Center website? Yeah, so why don't we do that?
So what after the conference, when you go to the Dalai Lama Center website and you go to this particular conference site on the set, you'll see beside each of the presenters a list of resources that you can click on and go, and anything that's mentioned here in this conference will be linked there. So Kim's research will be linked from there. And kind of, I think, in a related question, for me anyway, the question is, how do you encourage your colleagues, the administrators, the other teachers in the school to implement Mind Up, to include Mind Up? Because I imagine if a teacher has tried it and, as you've suggested, really likes it, that they would want other people to know about it. What kinds of things do you find are helpful for that individual change agent in the school?
Are you talking to me?
Both. Yeah, go ahead. Go first.
You're talking to me?
You talking to me?
It's not easy. You have to get buy-in. You got to get buy-in from the principal. You get buy-in from a teacher. Sometimes the teacher will come because they know about it. It's a lot of word of mouth. In this particular area, we have Lisa Pedrini, who's there, sort of harboring the Mind Up. At the moment, we don't have a center here, so once we do reestablish a center, then it'll be a little bit different. But in terms of going to schools, you go to schools and you say, would you be interested in the program? Here's what it does. Here's the research. So you talk to the school superintendents of the areas. Are there some schools that we can pilot this in? And then the next thing you know, then the teachers start to talk to the other teachers. Some teachers will take it into their classroom, but the schools don't adopt it. But now what's happening is that we're finding that whole school, Mind Up schools are popping up everywhere. So it really is, it's one of those things, you can't stuff something down somebody's throat. All you can do is say, this works, this will improve your experience as a teacher, and it will improve your children's potential for success. And in doing so, by the way, I just wanted to let you know that now Mind Up is moving out, in after-school programs. It's in medical, so it's Mind Up Medical for health and well-being. We're working in areas of parents. We have Mind Up for parents now.
Okay.
And we are developing a lot of these areas, Mind Up Sports. So this is our world of the Mind Up brand. And it's actually beginning to grow, in schools and also in other areas in hospitals and so forth. We're also creating Mind Up for special needs. We're in special needs classrooms right now, and we're going to amend that a bit. So our program is being developed because here's my thought. In school is vitally important. It is one avenue. It is one avenue of distribution for how we're going to be change agents. But you have to go from a holistic point of view when you have these kinds of practices. We're not teaching math. We're not teaching this. We're teaching how to be a human. We're teaching how to manage yourself in situations that are difficult, obstacles, all these things we face as humans. So this is going in all different areas, So when you say how do you get into schools, not easy, but look what we've done. So it grows.
And one of the other questions is about parent training. Did you say that it is now, there is a parent component of Mind Up?
Yes, we do have Mind Up Family, and that's being used. I think our CEO right here, Kim McNatt, is here. She could talk to that. But we are working with families as well. And these are families that are implementing in the schools.
So what we'll do on our website as well is just link through this conversation on our site to, Kim, is that what we should do? Link to your website around the parent component as well? Great. Okay, so that's that question. Just staying for a minute again around this business of that person out there who's trying to make sure that Mind Up grows in their school and in their families. This is a question about the fact that mindfulness practices have recently been banned in the Ohio district. We all saw that. So,
Did you guys see that?
Gee, that's so interesting.
yeah.
Now,
It
by the
doesn't
way, the
surprise me,
Ohio
actually.
district, now there's Tim Ryan, Congressman Tim Ryan, who actually has put it into his region. Is it Akron?
Youngstown.
Okay, Youngstown. So
Got-
it is
just-
there, alive and well.
Sorry, just telling Kim to use her mic. So the question is, actually the question I have is, I would have expected there would have been pushback for sure about Mind Up, about mindfulness in schools, because it looks an awful lot like a religion when you look at the
Exactly.
pictures of children sitting. How's it going?
Actually, not much pushback. There, every now and then somebody will come in and say, "You're trying to teach our kids Buddhism." We're very science-based, so it's really about the brain.
Yeah.
We teach more about the brain than we do a brain break, and we don't meditate. So there's no sense of meditation in the classroom. If somebody wants to take longer periods of getting quiet, but it's an intrinsic experience where children actually get to feel their little heart rates and really get quiet. It's very, very important for the brain. So that's how we're working. So we really haven't had much pushback on that.
Yeah, and I was just going to add, so here in BC, there hasn't been hardly at all, but there was a case where there was some parents who complained, and they went on the CBC morning show with Rick Clough. Did anybody hear that one? And they had people call in, and they had the superintendent of assistant superintendent of a school district there supporting the program, and these parents saying it shouldn't be in school. They had 10 callers calling in saying, and do you know, every single one of those callers said, why didn't they have this when I was in school? Where can I get it for my children? The response has been so positive. People see it, but I think there's a couple. We've seeded the ground here very strong with having social responsibility as one of the performance standards for the BC school system. We've also social and emotional learning has been a part of this, and I have to say, Goldie, this goes back to the idea of having the research, the solid research, right from the beginning to support it, to show that it does lead to increased attention, increased well-being of children, and decreased behavior problems. And we do have even one study where we found a increase in academic achievement. So,
And there'll be more of those studies
Yes.
going on.
I'm going to just move to some of the questions that are now about implementation, but we do have a few here that are specific research questions as well. But did you find that there was a preferred time for the brain breaks? First thing in the morning, after recess, lunch?
We do first thing in the morning when they come in, because they're all jacked up. And, oh, God, these kids, when they talk about it, oh, my brain was so great, they always great. I really love it because we come in, we get quiet, I feel really good. It's like when you hear them explaining about, okay, so before they come in, because they're all jacked up, and then at recess, and after lunch, and then they choose to do it, which I've got two things to do before tests. First, I love when the teachers will sit with the kids and laugh. And say, okay, we're going to laugh whether you feel like it or not. And they stand up and they laugh and they go, hee hee ha, and then all the kids laugh, and you quiet them down, you do a brain break, and you take your test. And the reason is, it's an equalizer, it relaxes them, it makes them know that they're going to do the best they can, and whatever that is, their best is as good as it can get, and we're there with you. And then they get quiet. Well, they ask for a brain break before tests. So when teachers don't implement it, these kids will ask for it. So we do condemn, and then before we go home. So it's just, it's just perfect. And the teachers can manage their classrooms now. So that's the big thing. They say, oh, we bought time in the classroom. I don't have to say, settle down, boys and girls. It's like, pay attention. I used to say, kids don't know what paying attention means. They just don't know. It's like mindfulness, to be mindful. These kids, this is when I came back here, we used to ask the kids, I love going in the classroom. And they say, I don't know. Do you know what mindful means? I go, they get that look in their face. And I go, do you know what mindless means? They go, yes. So we're changing that around.
I was just going to add, I love that. One of the things, a couple of things I just want to say. So the question about how much. So there's two things here. One is I just want to make the case that the research is emerging on the idea of using mindfulness programs in schools. So there, in fact, Mind Up is one of the first programs that has been evaluated in a rigorous empirical way. There's lots of programs happening, but the science has not caught up yet with it, and so these kinds of questions about those daily practices. And the other thing is I want to emphasize that mindfulness is not just about sitting on a cushion. Being mindful and practicing mindfulness, they do mindful movement. Talk about mindful movement.
Yeah, we do mindful movement. So these kids can really get in touch with their body so they understand that this kind of movement that they do, like we balance. So they really get to understand how to balance themselves, or how to walk, or how to play, or how all the body is all a part of that. So, you create this symphony where the knee bone's connected to the thigh bone. And they really get a sense of moving mindfully, And that's like fun for them, but they really do. It's like one of the things in dancing, which I was a dancer, and I think that was my form of early focused attention, because, your body has to be absolutely centered, in order to do the things you do, strengthen it, and, give yourself the kind of discipline that you need to have in order to dance or do the things you need to do. Study, keep everything strong. So we do this in the classroom sometimes, which is stay focused, stay balanced, right? So it's really fun.
I'm just, Kim, did you want to add something? Because I'm just thinking about this and thinking that there are individual differences with children, right? So Kim, when you say children are less this, more this, we're talking about on average, or is that right? Because some of the questions here are about, what about that teenager who's entrenched, just is really stuck?
The teenager, am I talking about this?
Go ahead.
Okay. The teenager, because I tell you, this is my next book. Is the teen brain. Because we don't know enough, and we haven't been taught enough about the development of the brain, the teenage brain. So in order to understand it, this is what basically our next, I think, rendition of Mind Up is going to be, and I think I want to fix a little bit of the 7th, 8th grade, because when they're in 7th grade, they start to get depressed. So there's all kinds of stuff going on in the brain, and our kids need to know that. Because the brain is pruning. And all the things that the kid knew and all that, and it's just like the little thing, you got a lawnmower there just cutting all these circuits around.
You really are a scientist.
I mean, really. And so it's like they forget their retainer. They forget their thing. They don't know where they are. They ride in fast cars. They do everything because they don't think anything matters. And they get mad at the parent, and the daughter wants to individuate from the mother, and they can't do this, and then they feel bad, and then the girls are like wallflowers, and they used to be really great on the playground when they were 6 and 7, and now they feel terrible. Now they're just up and down. They're up 1 minute, down the next. Guys are angry, then they feel like kids, and they're sitting in their mother's arms, and then they go in the gang. I mean, they don't know where they are. And so the one woman, did anybody see Jill Bolt Taylor? Okay, well, she's a friend of mine. And she's become a friend of mine, and she's one of my great idols. I was so excited. I met her at TED again this year. But we're looking at working together. She is the perfect person to sit down now and let's start, because she's now talking, and you can look at her website and on the teen brain. So my next book after this one on happiness that I'm doing is going to be on the teen brain. 10 mindful minutes for your teen brain. Know your teen's brain, right? And it's for teachers and caregivers and so forth. We have to wrap this inside of our curriculum so the teachers understand, the parents understand, and the kids understand why you're feeling the way you're feeling. So this is vitally important, so you got me going. But anyway, that's what's going on with the teen brain.
That's good. You do the teenager very well, Goldie.
Am I becoming? I'm embodying the
yes,
teenager.
You are.
I think
very,
I
very
am.
good.
Yeah.
I'm feeling the teenage thing coming from over here.
Oh my God.
So Kim, two questions there actually. One is about individual differences, and so I transitioned that into that teenager who's involved in technology, on everything all the time. How do you engage them? Do you want to start with that larger question first about individual differences? Because when you report out from research, you report out.
Well, there's a couple of things. It isn't so much looking at each individual person. So, for example, we did look at, are there gender differences? Are there differences between boys and girls in terms of the effects of the program on them? And we have found none. That, in fact, the program is beneficial for both boys and girls equally well. We also, in terms of looking at things like grade level, so, for example, we have found that, and this is something we have to really figure out, because there's not a lot of research. In development, are there certain types of mindfulness practices that are more developmentally appropriate, that in fact that are more suited to certain ages? So I would wonder at the teen brain, in thinking about that, is if sitting for a long time and meditating is the best thing if you're having all these problems and they bubble to the surface, and then it's like, now go on to your math class, you know.
It really is. I think quieting down is important. I think long-term meditation, probably for a teen who's dealing with all this stuff, isn't as good. One thing that we do want to help our teens understand, I think, as we move forward, is that when they get quiet and their brain goes and it flies and whatever, do not attach to your thoughts. You are not your emotions and you are not your thoughts all the time. They have to know this. They have to learn this, is that sometimes they're going to be thinking crazy things. Their sexuality is going to be going nuts. There's so much stuff. It's all going to bubble up. Your brain is going to do what it does, but just let it go. Just let it go. That's all you need to do, and you just get real quiet and calm. And I think that that's kind of letting them know that they're safe and sound inside their own mind, I think is important.
That's good. I just think about something Cliff Sarin said in one conversation we had, and he said, your thoughts are just the op-ed page of the newspaper.
Oh, I love that.
Is that it? Did I get it right?
That is so
That's
great.
good, isn't
That's awesome.
I love
can
that.
remember your thoughts in the op-ed page.
Yeah.
That's perfect, because you're always editing, you're always doing, it's always very subjective. It's just not, you're not feeling this moment, so just let it fly.
Mm-hmm. The other thing is, I have a nephew who's in his 20s, and he sent me a link to a Mr. Rogers video the other day. That was, this is it. He's in his 20s, but he has such vivid memory of Mr. Rogers. And in this particular video, Mr. Rogers is singing about if you have big, bad, negative, blah, blah thoughts, it's not going to happen just because you have the thoughts. So there he is, that many years ago, knowing that, and so
he made me cry too.
I know, he is so good.
I mean, I was pregnant.
I'm going to try to make you cry.
Yeah. Well, it's so close to laughter.
Yeah. Kim, did you want to say anything else about differences, gender and?
I think we have not looked at other types of individual differences. I mean, I'm not exactly sure. There's so many types of, there's learning differences, there's race, ethnicity, there's socioeconomic status. There's so many other things to look at, so I'm not exactly sure.
Probably there'd be as many questions,
Yes,
but one of the
exactly.
questions here is about, what about impulsivity? So some children are more impulsive than others, and what about mind up with that?
But I would say if you're dealing with impulsivity, and reactivity, I would say more than likely you're dealing with more of a special needs situation. Sometimes if they're overly impulsive or compulsive. However, the program itself is not a panacea. It is a leveling ground for your classroom and for your kids. So when we go into special needs, we will adapt it for some of these children that actually do have some issues with impulsive behavior and so forth. And so that's I would say the answer to that, because you're going to always have different levels of not compulsivity, but an ability to cope.
Yeah, and I want to say it is a universal social and emotional learning program. By universal, it means it's for all children. It's not targeted specifically to special needs children, and often those special needs children need more types of things and modifications than just that. But this is really for all children.
One thing I just will say, school in Minneapolis was a challenge school, children with special needs, and this little girl was an ADHD gal. Her brain was very, very busy, and she knew it, and she was about 9. And so the social worker picked her up. And she said, well, how do you like your new Mind Up program? And she went, oh, I love it. Because just when my brain is just getting all confused, I just sit there, I get really quiet, and I imagine I'm taking my brain and I'm pulling it back into place.
Oh, wow. Wow. That's a great image.
And so that's the kind of thing. And you know what? That didn't come from our program. That came from you amazing teachers. You who are creative, who are adapting these things, get ideas, which we love. I mean, it's just amazing to hear what you guys are doing with this. So it's one example.
And I just want to add one thing. It just made me remember something. When we were first doing the research on the program, and I was talking to teachers and getting their input, and talking to kids, because I was also a bit curious, skeptical of how the children would respond to the program, what they would say about it. And it was almost like they were telling us, and some of them did tell us, finally, you're teaching us something we can use in our life.
I love that. This is a question about how young, how young can you be doing, and we're talking about Mind Up here, and that doesn't mean that if your children aren't yet in school and old enough to take Mind Up that you shouldn't be doing any of this. I mean, some of these strategies I think people can use anywhere. So the question is how young? Can this be implemented, or can these strategies be implemented with children?
I would say yes, but I'm going to look to Linda Lantieri,
Oh,
who is
Linda.
going to be talking.
Where's
and
Linda?
Linda's right there.
I'll address that with her this afternoon. I'll bring
And
it
she
up.
has a book that she wrote that is for parents that basically goes, what's the youngest age? 4 or 5. So it's for parents, and it goes through those kinds of things.
And
but
the
I
name
think
of the book?
the name of the book. I should know this. Building Emotional Intelligence.
Linda's going to be here this afternoon, so we can go back to that. But it's an awesome book. Yeah. Anything about young? Do you have any young children, very young children?
We have preschoolers. It's very, very simple. It's not, the whole curriculum, but, we do the breathing with them. We have looking in the eye and saying hello to each other, certain kinds of things that you do. Kindergarten, though, they're really doing it in kindergarten, which is fabulous. I mean, it's amazing what these kids, they say, oh, they can't understand the brain. They really do.
Yeah.
And we're starting now to look at animation. So we're going to be animating our lessons.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very, very excited about that.
That's Molly, by the way, Lala, who keeps walking up and down here. There are a few questions about research that I'm going to get to now. This is about how, and don't let me forget about people are asking more about parents. How can we get more information? So there's a question about where did you do research in different socioeconomic areas?
So yes, we have. In fact, the first study that we did, we looked really, the 6 schools in which we did the research really spanned Vancouver from the most impoverished school to a sort of middle class. And so, and I have to say, we did find no differences in terms of the effectiveness of the program.
But there is something that maybe people don't know so much about. There is an assumption that if you're in the part of town where people are struggling more financially, that they're going to necessarily have more stress and difficulties. And if they're in the more affluent part of town, that they don't need it so much.
Right. So there's something that's a really good, important point to make. In the last several years, there's been some research really emerging about the culture of affluence and the psychological costs of material wealth, and finding that, in fact, those children and teens who live in affluence are, in fact, even more, have higher levels of depression and stress, and even more likely to abuse substances. So there is a number, actually Mike Cheeks at Mihai did a study looking at happiness among adolescents and found that the least happy adolescents were at the highest socioeconomic status. It was an inverse relationship between happiness and affluence.
Mm-hmm. It's so shocking, and it's so sad. But, it is what it is. And so it almost is like they found more resilience, actually, in the inner city. So the kids are more resilient there.
And how do you define resilience?
Wanting to get out, wanting to make it happen, having dreams that they actually think they can do it. Like, they're challenged. And also some of these children actually do go home and take out the trash and help their moms. They actually have to do certain things. They're survivalists. And when you're not given those tools and you're given too many toys and given too much stuff and your parents are both working and your mother's getting her nails done and this is going to the thing and you've got 4 cars and the thing and there's this way abundant, you don't get a sense of value and you don't know where you are as the child in the family itself because there's a tendency to be greatly distracted by all the things that money can buy.
There's a question here that I think maybe we need to explain the measure a bit more, because the question's about, did the researchers who were in there measuring the children, did they know whether they were talking to the children who were in a control group or a mind-up group? So the impression is that there are people going in and measuring children.
Right, so there were a couple of things. So there were a couple of different studies. The first study, we had the children reported on their own, did self-reports. So, and the people administering the measures did know which classrooms were getting that, but these measures were not ones that would be, I guess we call demand characteristics or something like that, not susceptible to that in terms of social desirability. The teachers did report on the children's behavior, so there is a bias there in terms of teachers knew which children were, teachers were not blind to implementing the Mind Up program. They knew they were implementing it. And then in another study we did have measurements of executive function as well as looking at cortisol. We collected salivary cortisol that was I won't go into all the details, but a biological measure that gives you an indication of stress. And in that case, those were more third-person objective measures, and so they're not as influenced, and found similar results, positive results of the program.
Well, we've come to the end of our conversation. And we have some questions left, so maybe we'll post some more of these questions and some answers on our website, just so we can carry on this conversation. But Goldie and Kim, thank you so much.
What a
Goldie,
pleasure.
for coming
Well,
out.
that's
And
great. Thank you.
Thank you.